might have the best club in the world, you might have the best intentions in the world, but if you don't take care of your people, they will leave you. Regardless if it's going to be today or in 6 months or in 1 year, everyone needs to be aligned. The strategies, the vision, the mission, the objectives, everything needs to be aligned. Everything. And it starts with the president. Everyone needs to give the example, and leading by example, although it might be the hardest thing to do, not only in football, but in life as well, because it takes a lot of time for people to recognize that they are being led by example. That is the strongest tool that you're going to find, because it's the one that people will not forget. So if you have to decide one way to lead your team, try to do it by example, try to do it from top to bottom. And if someone is out of the way and they are not following exactly the values that you want and the example that you want to be implemented at your club, they don't belong to you. They don't belong to your organization. And as harsh as it can look, they cannot be there. So it's your job also to make sure that everyone is aligned, everyone is embodying the culture that you want at your club. Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode of my newest series on football club management. And how can you take all this information and take it for your reality, regardless of the size of your club? That's exactly why I'm doing this. And I'm trying to provide you tools and strategies, and of course, the processes and structures, which we're going to talk about today, that can set the foundations for you to achieve the goals that you are trying to achieve, either the short-term goals or even the long-term goals. And they can be the goals that you have, the sports goals. So that means the performance ones, the ones that are related to the on-field performance. Also to the ones that are more related to the organization, to the management side of things, regardless if it's financial or perhaps the scouting, the department that you want to implement, or it can be some problem with the laws, regulations, HR, or TLC, as they call it now, for talent, learning, and culture. And this is exactly what I want to start, the culture. We're going to speak about two main topics today. The two main topics are organizational charts on one side, and then on the other side, we're going to speak about the structures. Why are they so relevant when you think about culture that you are trying to implement at your club? My opinion is very clear. The culture, as they say, is how people behave when you are not present. And the organizational charts and the structures that you have and processes, of course, that we're going to speak behind those are the ones that will set the foundation for people to know how to behave. Because we already spoke about the mission and the vision and the values and the objectives. Now, going towards a more strategic approach, we need to think about how can people feel related and know exactly what to do when a situation comes. It can be change management, and I've been spoken about that a lot in the recent past. So just to give you an example, imagine something happens at your club, someone left, players will leave, a transfer occurs. It can be anything. There's a flood within the facilities of your club. Any situation, you need to be prepared for that. For that, you need processes. For that, you need a structure. For that, the people will need to rely on an organizational chart. And I know by now you're probably thinking, okay, but this will give me theory, and I really enjoy more the practical part. I completely understand your perspective. However, for the things to happen in a more consistent way, for you to delve into the practical side of things, there's a need to have processes behind it. There's a need to have foundations so that people know who they need to report to, what do they need to do if something occurs, who they need to speak with. That's very, very important. That's why we are going to start on this theme today. Starting by organizational charts, we need to understand how things are normally done. So normally there's two theories. You can either go for a more flat hierarchy. So This normally it's easier to apply when your organization has small numbers of staff, and it's very easy for you to take a decision because, of course, again, this is everything that we're going to speak now. It's about to make it easy to make decisions. So if a decision needs to be made, if you have a more flat organization, a flat hierarchy, that means that it's very easy to reach people, so the decision makers in this case. Whereas you might have more flat or you might have a more vertical one. The vertical one has good things and, of course, bad things, as everything. Because on the flat one, if you can have a more direct approach, a more direct relationship, even with the decision makers, whereas on the vertical one, most likely you're going to have some barriers to it to reach some other like higher staff or managers or the president or the executive committee. You might have a more difficult time to reach the decision makers. However, that can also create a more um, precise aspect of how you are delivering things. So when you think about the strategies, when you think about who's going to be responsible for what, if you think about accountability, there's always the risk that on a flat kind of hierarchy, on a flat system, the accountability gets harder for you to pull on someone. Because again, if it's flat, the responsibility is almost like shared in equal terms between everyone, and that can become a little bit hectic when you're thinking about strategy, when you think about the club, who's going to be responsible for what. So that can bring you different challenges. On the other side, a more vertical one will not give you direct access to some of the stakeholders, or even the president, or like I spoke before, you might give you a little bit more hard times for you to reach certain people, especially the decision makers, the higher profile. But on the other side, it basically sets a more clear way of how to achieve and the objectives that you're trying to do, the strategies that you're trying to do. It's also easier to take data, especially the metrics that you're trying to take to help you on the decision making. It just helps you to streamline and break down whatever you're trying to implement at your club. So there are basically two sides of things. Now, why is this relevant? When you think about a normal hierarchy, you're going to think about, of course, the president. Then normally you're going to have an executive committee. So they will be the ones responsible not only for selecting the people that will take decisions or implement their decisions. That will be a more appropriate way to say it. But also, they are the ones defining the strategies. So if they are defining the strategies, the executive committee, then they are also responsible for selecting the people that are going to take the action. So who is going to implement the actions that they decided? That normally brings also to the management side. So the management side of so let's think about the head of physio, the head of the medical department, the head of scouting, the head of the technical department, the head of finance, the head of law. You understand my idea. He can be the head of anything. That person is basically the intermediate, the third party, the person that is between not only the executive committee, those that decide the strategies, those that are also accountable for defining the next steps, the vision of the club, implementing the vision of the club through the strategies they are trying to implement, but also they are the intermediates between these decision makers and then the ground field, the ground personnel, the ground staff, the ones that will be day to day operating and implementing the strategies, the action plans that the executive committee decided. Heads and this kind of midline here between the executive committee and the personnel on the field, they have a word to say in terms of the strategies, because of course they know the operations, they know the day-to-day operations, so they are more aware of what can work and what cannot work. And in terms of the implementation, they are also the ones that can monitor what's happening and how fast things are being implemented, where are the struggles, what are the benefits of whatever strategy that you are implementing. They know exactly what's happening because they are on the ground as well, managing, understanding the difficulties that people have, understanding how can things can be faster. and their job is also to evaluate that and then bring that the decision to the decision makers with data, with more supportive tools that help them to the executive committee to understand regarding the vision that they implemented, regarding the objectives and the strategies they implemented, the action plans they implemented, what is working, what is not working, and why, so that they can then not only evaluate their own strategies, but also forecasts for the next strategies. So this is very helpful when we think about the reporting system. The reporting system, and this is why organizational charts are so important. The reporting system allows everyone at your organization to know exactly who they need to achieve or who they need to reach if they want to speak about something that happened. I'll give you an example. Let's say that at a training session, one athlete got injured. The injury does not seem to be a light one, it's a severe injury. Well, not only the medical department, of course, they are on the field, so they are immediately called to the action. So they need to go on the field, evaluate the injury, and so on. But also, the coach at site and eventually the technical director, if he or she is there at the site, they need to know the reporting system. So in this case, you have two departments that are completely aligned about the health and safety measures they need to take into consideration. They need to know the responsible that they need to call for something, or like in this situation for what happened. And this makes it easy, the process makes it easy to make the decision of, okay, now this happened, I need to call the technical director, whereas the physio needs to call the head of medical, and then they need to take the steps further into calling like an ambulance. You understand the process, speaking to the parents. So there's a process that is streamlined and it's easier to go through when things are organized. That's why the processes are so important. But if you want to take these for another element, we can speak about something that happened on the match. So the technical department in this case, if a coach is deciding the next mesocycle that he or she is trying to implement, they know exactly what is the process, the reporting process of that mesocycle. So they need to discuss that within their staff. Then they need to take that to the technical director. The technical director now needs to get everything organized in a shared, probably file that needs to be going to the head of football or the director of football. And then the director of football needs then to, if the results are going good or bad, that person needs to be accountable when they are now taking the scores and the results and the performances, why this working, why is this not working, to again the executive committee. And eventually this will impact the strategies as well, because if the club wants to develop players for future sales, then if they are not, of course, reaching those sales, they're going to ask, why is this not happening? And of course, this will go down to the director of football or head of football, technical director, and then coaches, trying to understand what is being worked at the field, what is being delivered to the players, and why are players being developed or not. So again, to finalize this thing on the organizational chart, it starts with a simple sheet that you can simply set up. How is the structure of the club and why is this so important? What are the departments? Who's the head of who? And what is the reporting system? Because it eventually becomes very visual for them to understand, okay, this is the reporting system. This is what I need to do. This is who I need to call in case something happens. This is who I need to meet for my cycles. And that becomes very, very easy and very visual. And that will help you eventually when the decision comes to the executive committee and the president, of course. Speaking about the structures, I think now it's very easy for you to understand the structures. And by structures, we can define it as the departments that are within your organization. Again, if you're selecting a more flat oriented organizational chart, your structures will be very much streamlined within the flat organization. It doesn't mean that it's not accountable. However, it might be challenging for you to create a reporting system. Now, on the other side, if you're talking about more about a vertical one, the structures basically they are the heart of the organizational chart. And by that, I mean the departments, because the departments now, they'll give life to all the strategies that the executive committee and the president selected as the winners, as the bets that they want to take to achieve their goals, their vision in the club. So when you understand that, the relationship that we need to understand now is the relationship between these structures, these departments, and the decision makers. These processes and the organizational chart is only there to give life to all the structures that we are talking about. So these structures, these departments, once they are there to give life to the strategies that we define. Now it's about understanding the decision makers. For the decision makers, as we spoke before, there's two elements that are very important, and they are to monitor, and that's why you have the head of football or the head of finances or the technical director, whoever you call it. But they are there to understand exactly what is the direction that things are heading to, and monitoring that processes, because they need to be envision the objectives of the club. Basically, what you want is people that have the right values, is people that have the right attitudes, people that have the right intentions to be aligned with the decisions, with the vision that you want, and that eventually will help you when you will need to take a decision in continuing and to pursue that decision, that or that strategy that you have, or not. Or maybe you need to evaluate, maybe you need to reassess, maybe you need to change something, and then again go back to on track. Because as an example that I gave before, if you are selling t-shirts at your club, you want to sell your match kits, and your idea is to sell 100 and you are selling 300, or you are selling only 50, you need to understand why, the reason why that is happening, or the reason why that is not happening. So that is key for you to monitor, for you to reassess, for you to evaluate, and eventually readjust and then go back to action, if that makes sense. Because one of the strategies that you might have, you know by now that I like to give a lot of examples so that you can feel related to whatever the decision that you are taking or strategy. So let's take the example that you are trying to implement a strategy of franchise or expansion per se. Not a franchise, you want to expand yourself. And you are opening new locations. By 6 months or a year or 2 years, whatever the forecast that you gave, you set objectives to achieve on those locations. You need to see the results, because some of them you might give it a year and you open 5, and then after a year you monitor, of course, you tried your best, you need to reassess and evaluate the results that you had on those, and only 3 are profitable. So maybe you're not going to be pushing the 2 that are not profitable, you're going to focus your attention on the other 3, and from those 3, maybe after a year you need to select 2, and so on. But basically you have metrics, you have KPIs, you have a clear strategy that will help you to envision or embody the vision that you have at your organization, and that will help you when you are selecting the right strategies, and that will help you on the decision making, which eventually is the best case scenario. And this is why we have strategies, this is why the processes exist, this is why the structures exist, and this is why you need to have the right mission, vision, values, and the people that embody those to implement them on the field. And we reached the end of the second episode. On the second episode, we spoke about organizational charts, and if you want a more flat or vertical structure at your club. And then, of course, the structures, the departments, and why they have a close relationship with the decision making at your club. Because these people that are on the ground, they are being guided by the intervention, by the vision, by the mission, the strategies that the executive committee and the president aligned for your club to, of course, reach those objectives. So it's very clear by now that all the things that we're doing, all these processes, although they are less practical and more theoretical, they are only there to help you when you think about the decision making. When after 1 year, 2 years, 6 months, 3 months, whatever the guidelines that you gave, and also the timelines for those objectives to become real, you need to have tools to help you when you're going to evaluate if that was a successful strategy, a successful action plan or not. So This has a close relationship, not only with the decision making, but then with the culture. And the culture will be the main theme on the third episode, where we're going to speak about culture, people, and TLC. Because nowadays, people are not speaking about HR anymore as human resources, but people are talking about the relationship, about people, culture, and TLC as talent, learning, and culture. Because talent, learning, and culture is where you want to reach. You might have the best club in the world, you might have the best intentions in the world, but if you don't take care of your people, they will leave you. Regardless if it's going to be today or in 6 months or in 1 year, everyone needs to be aligned. The strategies, the vision, the mission, the objectives, everything needs to be aligned. Everything. And it starts with the president. Everyone needs to give the example and leading by example, although it might be the hardest thing to do, not only in football, but in life as well, because it takes a lot of time for people to recognize that they are being led by example. That is the strongest tool that you're going to find, because it's the one that people will not forget. So if you have to decide one way to lead your team, try to do it by example, try to do it from top to bottom. And if someone is out of the way and they are not following exactly the values that you want and the example that you want to be implemented at your club, they don't belong to you. They don't belong to your organization. And as harsh as it can look, they cannot be there. So it's your job also to make sure that everyone is aligned, everyone is embodying the culture that you want at your club. I'll see you on the next episode. I hope you like it. And if you have any questions, just drop me a comment. I'm here. All right? I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.